All right. Good morning and or good afternoon. I'm not sure where everybody is from. Thank you for attending these presentations, but also getting to attend to mine. I'm very excited to share what I have found. I'm a master's student at Carlow University in the Masters of Arts of Psychology program there. Dr. Mew is my research supervisor for the study as well. My study is looking at the media's influence on the public's mental health perceptions. So the purpose of the study was to examine which forms of media have more influence on the public's perception of mental health and mental illness, specifically a negative mental health or mental illness viewpoint, or the NMIV. And I also wanted to look at the extent of which certain medias can influence this perception that they form. And I chose to look at news media, entertainment media, and social media, which I will explain in the next slide why I picked those three. We hope that the study's findings can be used to begin to shift the way that mental health and mental illness is talked about or portrayed in various media forms across the world. The literature review, there was two that I want to highlight. There was Stewart from 2006. They did a literature review that suggested that media in general has had a large impact on contributing to the negative mental illness perceptions. And it was this literature review that pointed out news, social, and entertainment media specifically. So I chose those three to look at in my study. Fawcett from 2015 also discovered that much of the public's knowledge of mental illness comes from mass media forms. And currently, there is no study that has quantitatively studied Stewart's claim, and there's also no study that looks at if there's a specific media form that has more influence than the others. I have two hypotheses that I chose to look at, and the first one is that the more media consumption extent a person has, the more likely they are to hold a negative mental illness viewpoint. And then the second hypothesis is looking at whether news, entertainment, or social media will have varying intensity effects on the extent of that negative mental illness viewpoint being formed. So this is figure one. This is just looking at the prioritization of the media consumption sources using the analytical hierarchy process. And then figure two breaks down the two hypotheses into two different flowcharts as well. So I did the research design. I conducted a survey, and there was two sections to the survey. The first section looked at the media usage comparison, and this section is the one that utilized the AHP method to compare media usage between news, entertainment, and social medias for the participants. And then the second section, I had them look at mental illness and or disorder perceptions. And I pulled the 6 most common misconceptions and or myths about mental illness from NAMI, which is the National Alliance of Mental Illness, and what they had found as far as I believe it was most recently updated 2019. And then, so the results, we had 30 usable responses. And so the first hypothesis, which was based around Stewart's literature review, we found that it was not supported. What we actually had found was that the more media consumption extent a person had, the less likely they were to hold a negative mental illness view, and it was statistically significant at 0.024. And the second hypothesis, which again is looking at news media, social media, and entertainment media to see the extent of the effect, we found that it was proven true that different media types have different effects. And what we did find was that social media has a statistically significant effect on the negative mental illness viewpoints, but similar to the first hypothesis, it was actually negative. What we found was that the more social media usage a person was to use, the less likely they were to hold this negative mental illness viewpoint at well. It was statistically significant at 0.016. news and entertainment media were found to not be statistically significant for the second hypothesis. And the implications, we hope that the findings of the study can help further push for a change in how mental health and mental illnesses or disorders are portrayed and spoken about in media forms, with a more positive change in the media's representation of mental illnesses and disorders. We hope that a person who suffers from said disorders are more likely to seek out treatment or help. And typically what is seen currently is that due to a lot of stigmatization of mental illnesses and disorders, there are many people who are suffering will not take that first step to begin to seek treatment or help, or those who are currently seeking it are less likely to continue it due to fear of ostracization by society and by those around them if it comes to light that they are suffering from a mental illness. So we had 3 limitations to the study. The survey was self-administered, and there was little ability to control for false or random answers from the participants. It also was a pilot study. We had 42 participants total, and we had to toss 4 answers because they were left unanswered. I also posted this to my personal Facebook account to try to get as many surveys sent out and connected through Facebook. So that limits how diverse my sample population was compared to what I would have liked it to be. And then future research, we would find it interesting to compare the AHP prioritization versus a direct ranking provided by the participants themselves. And there is a future research study planned to determine if any mental illness knowledge can influence or even negate the amount of negative mental illness viewpoint that media can create. And then the conclusion, this survey provided a methodological contribution by using AHP-based survey questions to explore, the relative importance of different media types. And this also allowed for more accurate responses from participants. What Dr. Mew and I concluded, though, is that the study suggested that Stewart's hypothesis in his literature review was correct at the time that it was conducted. When looking back, given that the literature review was conducted in 2006, media forms and media platforms were not as advocated for giving out positive information. And from 2010 is where I began to see a very drastic shift in the way that mental illness and mental health is represented in social media, specifically in media, specifically within social media platforms. I've seen a lot more positive Facebook groups showing up to help people who have anxiety with those who do. There's a publication of a magazine that's written by people who are passionate about psychology for people to use, and it waters it down the information in a way that's consumable for anybody of any education or any background as well. And then my key references that I used to help conduct this study. And then if anybody has any questions, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Anastasia. If anybody have any question, remember you can open your mic, or you can also use the chat. Well, I have one question, maybe for Anastasia, and also can be for Paula, since this I think it was one of your first experiences using AHP or AMP. I would like to know, I don't know, what do you consider have been the main difficulties in applying these models, and how did you handle these main difficulties?
Okay, if you want to start, Anastasia.
You can go ahead and start.
Yeah, okay. So for me, it was the second time of applying this method, but it is true that I don't have a lot of expertise in this field, and some of the times I feel that one of the most important part of this process is to get in contact with all the experts and to, because normally they are very important people and they don't have a lot of time to share with other people. For me, maybe this is the most difficult part.
For me, this is the first time that I've used AHP on my own. I'm an assistant to Dr. Mew on one of his studies, so I'm familiar with AHP, but this is the first time I've been left to do it completely on my own. I think the biggest challenge for me was coming from a psychology degree. We don't use AHP, so having to adjust the survey and trying to fit the rest of the survey to match the way the AHP with, 9 answer choices and giving them more options, I think was the more challenging part, because I'm used to having like a lot of psychology studies use Likert scales, and I've typically seen a maximum of 5 answers, and it's 5 isn't enough now. It's like, okay, what other words can I use? How can I, add on to this a bit more here and there to make it very similar to the AHP section? That was more challenging to me.
If I may add something, there is one part of the study that Anastasia mentioned as future research, but the data has been collected, well, at least in the pilot, each person was asked pairwise comparison questions in terms of what type of social media, news or entertainment and so forth. But at the end of the survey, there is a question that says something like summarizing what is your, to what extent you consume news, to what extent you consume social media from 1 to 5 or to 7.
7.
And 7. Okay. And the idea is to compare if there is a difference or how much of a difference there is between the ranking developed using the AHP pairwise comparison against the ranking asked arbitrarily, because all the time we have said that AHP for surveys should be better because of the way the person can rationalize what's more important, but there hasn't been any quantitative study about really proving that or showing that there is a difference. So we're aiming to that, to make this study grow. So 2 years from now, we'll probably be coming back with something much more elaborate. And Anastasia is just beginning her journey into AHP and research in general.
Thank you.
I have a very brief question, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Great work, Anastasia and Paula. I really enjoy. And I think that you utilize a different technique for identifying the most important indicator that hours. So you could explain a little bit more about the regressions that you conducted. I know that your sample is right now is small. It's, you said 42 cases.
Mm-hmm.
But when you develop your especially your multiple regression, could you explain a little bit more how you conducted, because you have as independent variable what's the score, the final score for each participant, or how? Yeah, just if you can explain it a little bit of the regression, please.
How we developed the final scores was using SPSS, and we took the second section of the survey with the mental illness myths and misconceptions, and we ended up turning them into Z-scores alongside the AHP version and compared them together to break down each question to make sure that they matched alongside the AHP, so that each section could be compared together with an equal ranking kind of system.
I think Cesar, that Luz refers to the analytical part. Do you have the slides of the analysis?
Oh, yes. Sorry.
How you did the multiple regression, for example?
Yes, I do have those.
For the, well, I'll let her.
So that's for the 3 media types. We did a model summary for these 3 media types where after we converted them into z-scores to be able to be compared to the AHP section as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also did the same thing to the dependent variable as well. We converted that into a z-score, just again to make comparison relatively easy.
If I may add here, Luis, when we develop priorities, what is for the 3 types of media, news, entertainment, and social media, so you get a priority 0.5, point, etc. That's standardized, and that the average is calculated, and that's the value that measures the extent that you consume media. And that value, each separate value, is also the extent to which you consume each of the types of media. That's the way that part was
okay.
done. And well, for the negative mental illness view, 7 items were considered based on a study about negative mental illness view. So really the indicators were used from an article, actually not a research article, but an article about negative myths about mental illness view.
Mm-hmm.
But interesting enough, when Anastasia put them all together, because she found it, all this, they hold very well like a scale, and they have great reliability. And so I think she's lucky that the most important variable in any study, the dependent variable, is very strong, and with 7 indicators. Actually, it's less than 7, right?
Yeah, so we ran reliability 2 different times. The first time we did it on all 7, and we found that there was, I believe, 2 questions that didn't hold very strongly. So we reran it again, and we found that I believe it was question 3 and question 4, we ended up when we removed them because they were not strong enough to do a I believe it was 0.3 for the reliability. So here's the results after we removed question 3 and question 4.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay.
Very nice work. Congratulations.
Okay, maybe for the last couple of minutes, I would like to ask some of you that are experts to give us, as a new generation of users, some advisors, maybe Jorge, maybe Monica, maybe Mu, that have more experiences and of course, Mrs. Sati can give us some advices for the new generation using AHP, AMP.
I don't think there is a best method. As we always says, I mean, if you are asking for a tip, I would say that if you have a very easy tip, if you have many people involved, never try to use ANP. It is too complicated. So ANP is only can be used only when you have few experts and with a lot of time in front of them, or very well-known experts that you may sit with them and spend a couple of hours explaining first the influence metrics and the questionnaire and everything. So I prefer ANP in these situations, but when we have a lot of experts, or for example, you want to explain any of these techniques to other people to convince them to apply them, of course, only AHP is useful in these situations. So this is my way of seeing it. I don't know.
Thank you, Monica.
Enrique,
You also have another one in the chat. Thank you.
So somebody's gonna.
Go ahead, Enrique. I better listen to you.
Yes. Really, one thing that I would encourage, and I've noticed it, many times we fall so much in love with the methodology and the analysis that we lose track, or really that the decision is for somebody, or that there is a decision to be made and not an analysis. So never lose the context of the decision. And I like what Paula Molina presented, that she didn't just say a bunch of experts was consulted, but she said experts in this area, clearly each area corresponded to one of the type of stakeholders. All that is really very important. Otherwise, we're doing fancy math, and we love it, and it's correct, but it's not that practical.
Yes, I agree with, of course, with Monica and Enrique. And what I would add is, what is the purpose of using this kind of techniques, and why AHP and NAP are very useful, very powerful tools, in which context. And the important thing is to be aware that these are, I look at them like communication tools. They are powerful tools to engage with the stakeholders in difficult decision making. And it provides you a means for you as an aggregator, as a consultant, to be agnostic, that your opinion doesn't bear in the final analysis. It's the decision of the people you're helping to arrive to a decision. So that's the first case. You have to be agnostic, and it helps you, AHP in particular, in that respect. The added complexity of the ANP, you have to, I agree with Monica, you have to be very careful. I mean, I have done many good things with the ANP when I passed from AHP to ANP, but you're adding a layer of complexity that you have later to explain to the stakeholders, to the users, the actual users. So you have to be aware of that. So if you can keep it simple for the problem, it's great. If the problem is so complicated to a level of complexity, you have to use networks, then you have to do it. Okay. So that would be all my opinion.